Four men who have absolutely no reason to be standing side by side stood side by side anyway, and the two guys who thought they had Penta and Rey Mysterio right where they wanted them, they didn't see it coming. Nobody did. And that's exactly why we need to talk about what really happened on Raw last night. What is going on, wrestling family? Welcome back to WWE Galaxy. I'm Nova, and if you were watching Raw on June 8th, you already know the segment we're breaking down today. But here's the thing, most people are calling it a brawl, a fun moment, a cool visual, and they're not wrong. It was all of those things, but it was also something bigger, something that doesn't fully make sense until you look at the four names involved and ask yourself, why these four? Why did Chad Gable and Dragon Lee come running? What does it mean that they did? And what does Ethan Page and Rusev do now that their plan didn't just fail, it failed publicly, in front of the whole roster, in front of the whole WWE universe? That's what we're getting into today. The moment on the surface was exciting. What's underneath it is genuinely fascinating. Hit that like button if you're already locked in. Subscribe to WWE Galaxy if you haven't already. And don't go anywhere, because the second half of this breakdown is where it really gets interesting. Let's start with what Ethan Page and Rusev were actually trying to do here, because this wasn't random. That's the first thing you need to understand. Ethan Page is one of the most calculated heels on the Raw roster right now. The all-ego persona is built entirely around one idea, that he deserves more than he's getting, and everyone in his way is the reason he hasn't gotten it yet. That mentality makes him dangerous, not in a wild, unpredictable way, in a planned way. He picks his spots, he picks his targets, and when he decides someone needs to be made an example of, he doesn't just go after them, he engineers the situation so the outcome feels inevitable before it even starts. And then you add Rusev to that equation, and now you don't just have a schemer, you have a schemer with a wrecking ball standing next to him. So when Page and Rusev set their sights on Penta and Rey Mysterio, this wasn't two heels looking for a fight, this was a statement. Take out one of the most beloved legends in WWE history, and pair that with taking out one of the most frightening and unpredictable talents on the roster right now, and suddenly you've announced yourselves as a force that can hurt anyone. That's the math they were running. And honestly, on paper, it wasn't a bad plan. Rey Mysterio is a legend, but legends carry targets on their backs as much as they carry respect. And Penta is electric and fearless, but 2 against 1 changes things fast, even for someone with zero fear in their name. The numbers were there. The setup was there. Page and Rusev had every reason to believe this was going to go exactly the way they scripted it. It didn't. Here's where it gets really interesting, because Chad Gable and Dragon Lee showing up, that's the part that deserves its own conversation. Think about who these two are for a second. Not just as performers, as characters on this roster and what they represent. Chad Gable is a technically obsessed, deeply passionate wrestler who has spent years being underestimated, overlooked, and underutilized. He knows what it feels like to be the guy that the wrong people don't take seriously. And somewhere underneath all the technical wrestling and the intensity, there's a man who responds to moments that feel unjust, who shows up when the numbers don't add up fairly. That's not a character note WWE wrote for him. That's the thread that runs through everything he does. And Dragon Lee. Here's a young luchador who grew up in a tradition where loyalty between wrestlers who share a style, a culture, and a respect for the craft that's not just professional courtesy. That's identity. Dragon Lee sees Rey Mysterio in trouble, and there's no hesitation. There's no calculation. There's just movement. And that's what makes this combination so compelling. Gable and Lee didn't run out there because they had a meeting backstage and decided to form a faction. They ran out there because it was right. Because the situation demanded it. Because sometimes four warriors end up standing together not out of strategy, but out of instinct. But here's what nobody's really saying. This moment also tells us something about the current Raw locker room dynamic. There's a growing tension between the heels who operate through intimidation and numbers, and the talents who've quietly had enough of watching it happen unopposed. Page and Rusev represent one side of that tension. And what we saw last night, that's the other side starting to push back. Stop and think about the actual image here for a second, because visuals in wrestling tell stories before anyone says a single word. You've got Rey Mysterio, a man who has been in WWE for over 2 decades, a Hall of Famer, a generational icon of Lucha Libre, standing next to Penta, who is the raw edge of that same lucha tradition, zero fear, all violence, completely unpredictable. And then Chad Gable, the technical purist, the man who bends people in ways that shouldn't be physically possible. And Dragon Lee, young, hungry, fast, carrying an entire legacy on his back every time he steps through those ropes. ropes. 4 completely different wrestlers, 4 completely different energies, all pointing in the same direction. That's not a tag team. That's not even an alliance yet. That's something more interesting. That's a moment that could become something. And Ethan Page and Rusev are the reason it exists. Sometimes the best thing a villain can do for a story is accidentally create the hero team nobody expected. So where does this go from here? Because Raw doesn't let moments like this just sit there. Ethan Page is not going to process this quietly. That's not who he is. The all-ego character doesn't absorb a public humiliation and take time to reflect. It escalates. It retaliates. And with Rusev next to him, there's no reason for Page to pump the brakes. He's got the muscle. He's got the motive. And now he's got the embarrassment fueling all of it. Which means Penta, Rey, Gable, and Dragon Lee have a decision to make. Was last night a one-time thing? A collision of timing and instinct that probably won't happen again? Or is this the beginning of something? And here's the thing, that question is exactly what makes this compelling going forward. Because the 4 of them don't need to form a team. That's what's interesting. There's no title forcing them together, no authority figure booking them as partners. If they show up as a unit again, it's because they chose to. Because what Page and Rusev represent is worth responding to together rather than separately. Rey Mysterio has been the heart of Lucha Libre in WWE for so long that when he fights, it feels like the whole legacy of the style is fighting with him. Add Penta's fearlessness, Gable's technical IQ, and Dragon Lee's next-generation speed, and you've got something that on paper shouldn't work, but in practice is a nightmare to game plan against. Page and Rusev wanted to make a statement. They made one, just not the one they intended. They lit a fuse they don't fully understand yet. Look on the surface, last night was a great segment. Fun chaos, good energy, crowd loved it. That's real and that matters. But underneath it, there's a storyline engine starting to turn. 4 warriors from completely different worlds found themselves on the same side of a fight, and the 2 men responsible for putting them there are now going to have to deal with what that means. Ethan Page wanted to elevate himself by taking down legends. What he might have actually done is give those legends exactly the backup they needed to become something none of us fully saw coming. I genuinely cannot wait to see where Raw takes this. Here's my question for you today. Drop it in the comments right now. Do you think Gable, Dragon Lee, Penta, and Rey should actually become a full faction going forward? Or was last night a one-time thing that Raw should let breathe on its own? Let me know what you think. Like the video if this breakdown hit different. Subscribe to WWE Galaxy so you're here every time a moment like this needs a real conversation around it. I'm Nova, and we'll see you in the next one.